Hello and welcome to the Curator on Monocle Radio with me, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Over the next 60 minutes, I'll be bringing some of the very best interviews and reports from the past week. And this week we hear about a murder trial gripping Kazakhstan.
He tried to have the camera's wipe in the restaurant, which his family owns, after the event. He says that was because he was afraid of bad publicity, not because he knew that she had died.
Plus, the founder of one of the leading bookstores in the US.
Fulfilling what our mission has always been, which is to be that community hub and to be that place where, people just want to hang out and meet.
All that and much more here on The Curator with me, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. We start the show in Kazakhstan. The country has been gripped by a murder trial involving a former government minister. To tell us more, we were joined by Almaty-based journalist and author of Dark Shadows Inside the Secret World of Kazakhstan, Joanna Lillis.
The couple involved are Kvandik Bishimbayev, as you mentioned, a former minister of the economy in the Kazakh government, and his wife, Saltanat Nukianova. Bishimbayev is accused of having beaten his wife, his common-law wife actually, to death in a public place in a restaurant in the capital, Astana, not the former capital, as you mentioned, late last year. Now, the case has gripped the country, as you mentioned, because there has been shocking evidence presented in court, including visual evidence from videos of Bishimbayev striking his wife, and also audio evidence of him bullying her. So his wife died that night in a public place in a restaurant which is owned by the Bishimbayev family. And Bishimbayev is not only accused of murdering her with particular cruelty, which is a charge in the Kazakh Criminal Code, but also of covering up the crime because he didn't immediately report her death. He says that's what he's accused of. He says he did report her death as soon as he realized she had died. Now, the trial is currently drawing to a close in Astana, and there have been many dramatic scenes in the courtroom only today. Several members of the public turned up wearing T-shirts reading with slogans reading for Sultanat and the word life, meaning life imprisonment, demanding life imprisonment, and a request by the defense to have them removed from the courtroom was rejected today by the judge.
And has the huge attention that this case is garnering been handled correctly by the courts? Is there a pressure on the justice system being felt?
Oh, there's enormous pressure on the justice system being felt over this case. Now, Kazakhstan, often comes under fire over the state of its justice system, not least because the political authorities use the justice system in order to jail dissidents, for example. That's what critics say, at least. Now, in this particular case, the government has been extremely eager to make sure that justice is seen to be done. This is a trial which probably in Kazakhstan, there have been very few trials. Probably this is unprecedented in terms of the number of eyes that are on this trial, not only in Kazakhstan, but also internationally. And so the government has tried to make sure that this is seen to be a fair trial. Now, this has been done two particular ways. One is that the trial is being broadcast live, the first time ever in Kazakhstan. So the entire country can tune in, and also other people in the world, of course, to all sessions all day, every day. And secondly, this is being tried by a jury. Now, that's pretty rare in Kazakhstan, and that's at the defense, the request of the defense. Most trials in Kazakhstan are not jury trials, but this one is being tried by a jury. So this kind of level of transparency is not actually usual in Kazakh trials. But as I say, the government is really eager to make sure that this is seen to be transparent and fair. And certainly, the defense and the prosecution are both, the trial's been extensive. It's been going on for well over a month, and both are getting to have their say in a very public way.
And the defendant was previously a government minister, but he's previously been shown great leniency after being caught up in a corruption case. Do you think, given the mood of the public, that he is going to feel the weight of the law this time if he is found guilty?
Well, we will see that very soon because the verdict is certainly imminent. I would say that the point that you mentioned, that he was previously shown leniency after being sentenced to 10 years on corruption charges in 2018, and then being released under amnesty after serving just about 18 months of that. Now, that's one of the reasons this trial is attracting so much attention in Kazakhstan, because it's kind of a microcosm of what people see as an unfair system, a corrupt system as well. But an unfair system that accords those who are privileged, undue leniency. Now, in this case, I think because of the attention that the trial is getting, I think that it's hard to imagine that great leniency will be shown. But I wouldn't like to prejudice the verdict or the sentencing in any way. But the pressure of public opinion is such, and it has to be said that the evidence presented in court, which, is very visual, damning evidence. It is not circumstantial evidence. It is evidence of Bishenbayev shown to be striking his wife, punching her, dragging her by the hair. I mean, and that was at the time.
And he presumably knew that there were cameras and all this was being captured.
Well, that's a sign of impunity, if you like. I mean, he actually he tried to have the cameras wiped in the restaurant, which his family owns, after the event. He says that was because he was afraid of bad publicity, not because he knew that she had died. But that's a sign of the impunity that we're talking about, that the public is very, very angry about.
And finally, I've mentioned there the scale of domestic violence in Kazakhstan is sadly shocking. Do you think that this is turning into a cultural Me Too moment? The relatively new leader there, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, came into power in 2019 promising to give women more rights. It is a very traditionally patriarchal society. Is this a moment where sort of women's liberation is really taking hold?
Well, I mean, I think there are many people in Kazakhstan, not just women either, who hope this will be a kind of Me Too moment. And it is looking to some degree as if it might be, because a new law has just been rushed through Parliament and quickly signed off by the president, which criminalizes domestic violence and stiffens up the punishments for domestic violence. It is worth mentioning that back in 2017, domestic violence was actually decriminalized by the government, and people are angry about that too. We can see that there is action, there is an awareness in the government, in a government which is not always used to taking public opinion into account, it's fair to say, in a country like Kazakhstan, an authoritarian country. There is an awareness that people are very angry, and the force of public opinion is being felt in this trial. And everyone is glued to their computers, watching and waiting for the verdict to see what will happen.
We move on now to a highlight from the Monocle Daily. On Monday, the Solomon Islands Prime Minister Manasseh Sogavare announced that he would stand down after a poor election result that left multiple parties claiming power. Sogavare will most be remembered for realigning his country away from Taiwan and towards a relationship with China. Earlier, Monocle's Andrew Muller spoke with Edward Acton Kavanagh, author of Divided Isles, Solomon Islands and the China Switch, a book about the islands' debate over allegiances.
Solomon Islands, smaller countries in the Pacific for the last, forever, really, since World War II, have often been viewed in foreign policy conversations, in geopolitical conversations, from this incredibly distant perspective, from the 30,000-foot view, which often, and you even see this in articles, calls them chess pieces in a broader game, chess pieces in a grand geopolitical struggle between the United States, between China, Australia to a lesser extent. One of the things that immediately strikes you when you start to scratch around Honiara, speak to people in politics, they fundamentally know that. They know how the rest of the world views them. They know that they're viewed as sort of smaller and kind of pushovers. And instead of being insulted by that necessarily, they leverage that. They use that for their own advantage. And really the book describes that in, many, many stories. There's the Prime Minister Manasseh Sogavare, this long-standing leader in the country who's sort of been in and out of politics for a long time, in and out of the role of Prime Minister for a long time, knows fundamentally how to leverage the underestimation of him and his country for his own gain. And that's definitely the through line of the book. But it's not just the Prime Minister of the country that can do that. It's often other stakeholders, other people all across these small island states that know how to make the most of their otherwise quite underestimated position.
The key plot point of the book is the 2019 decision of the Solomon Islands to join that club of countries who have, I guess, revoked their diplomatic relationship with Taiwan in favour of establishing one with the People's Republic of China. And as the title Divided Isles suggests, there was not unanimity on the Solomons about that decision. But what is behind the argument for or against on the Solomon Islands? Are people arguing about this from a point of principle, i.e. we should stay allied to Taiwan because it is a nice, liberal, free democracy, whereas the People's Republic of China is the big bad People's Republic of China? Or is it strictly framed in terms of expedience, like which of these partners would actually be best for us?
There's a bit of both. So
thought you might say that.
At the political level, I mean, at that, amongst at the Prime Minister's level, people in Cabinet, many of these folks have been travelling around the Pacific for the last 20 years and have seen the benefits of the largesse of a relationship with Beijing flowing into Fiji, flowing into the rest of the region. The Pacific is unequivocally a poor part of the world. Mm-hmm. Papua New Guinea, Fiji in particular, have definitely benefited from a relationship with China in terms of infrastructure investment. Their airports are up to scratch, all that sort of stuff. So there was a recognition that Solomon Islands was missing out on that largesse from Beijing. So that's one thing. But one of the reasons it was so controversial is because despite people being in favour of Taiwan recognising that China is a bigger economic opportunity, there was a deep and ingrained loyalty towards the Taiwanese. And part of it is because of its commitment to democracy, its commitment to religious freedom in particular. And you have to remember, Solomon Islands had a 36-year relationship with Taiwan, and what that looked like was 36 years of justifying that relationship. Part of that justification was, a culture that looked quite, poorly upon China and upon the CCP and upon communism. So you have entire communities that have sort of grown up on a narrative that China is a kind of big and scary place, and then all of a sudden, almost overnight, you saw the entire narrative change. So that's where it became very controversial, and a lot of people were scared about the nature of that relationship.
I mean, it's easy enough to see for a smallish, remotish, poorish country like the Solomon Islands or the other Pacific nations what the appeal is to doing business with China. It's as you've described. It's the new airports, it's the new football stadiums, the nice new roads, etc., etc. Probably the interesting question that the Solomon Islanders have hopefully asked themselves, and certainly a question I know, and we will come back to this, that Australia is very keen on, is why China is interested in the Solomon Islands. China is not a charity, to say the very least. It is not distributing this largesse out of the goodness of its heart. What does China want with the Solomon Islands?
Well, the first thing China wanted was recognition from Solomon Islands. Solomons is a smaller country, very modest-sized economy. There's not a huge economic opportunity for China there. There was a frustration, though, within China that Solomon Islands was one of the holdout countries that still had formal diplomatic relations with Taiwan.
And everyone they pick off undermines Taiwan just that little bit.
Exactly right. But I think, there was a genuine desire for a long time from the Chinese government perspective to make this switch happen. It didn't happen out of the blue. But yet, the Chinese government doesn't necessarily have, Xi Jinping isn't sitting around there thinking, what am I going to do with Solomon Islands tomorrow? It's not the top foreign policy priority of China. And a lot of the move towards the switch, a lot of the catalysts that sort of led to that was the business community within Solomons itself, many of whom had relations in China, many of whom were ethnic Chinese, and who thought that their business opportunities would effectively be improved by a normalization of relations. So there was an appetite from China to make the switch happen, but there was also an appetite within Solomon Islands that led to that too. I think often the narrative is simply that China sort of stormed in there and pushed people around and got the job done like that. There was a genuine sort of push from within the ethnic Chinese business community within Solomons. And I think, that's where a lot of that relationship really, really holds between the two countries. There's a political relationship. There's also this quite sophisticated, quite entrenched business relationship between some of these ethnic Chinese communities in Solomons and back in mainland China.
I did want to ask, just finally, a question about the Solomon Islands, not so much from a geostrategic view, but about the islands themselves. It does come across in the book that you are yourself quite charmed by them as a place and by the people who live on them. And they're not very often visited by people. So if I give you 20 to 30 seconds to make a pitch, what's actually your favourite thing about the Solomon Islands? What do you enjoy about them?
Everyone who travels all over the world and comes back often has this sort of cliche that, these people are the most hospitable in the world, all that sort of stuff. I genuinely think Solomon's has a claim to that. It is remarkably open and accepting. It's physically the most beautiful part of the world I've ever seen, and I've been been lucky enough to go to 70-odd countries. This is a genuine tropical paradise. It's abundant, it's joyful, there's huge problems, but there's huge happiness, and it's a thrill to travel around that country. So, one of the purposes of the book in many ways was to, noting that people had a sudden interest in this country because of the geopolitical conversation that was happening. I hope someone can pick up the book and have a read and learn a bit about the dynamics of all of that, but also get a sense of what this place is like on the ground, this colourful, beautiful, quite endearing country.
You are listening to The Curator here on Monocle Radio. And now a highlight from my show, The Stack. I had the pleasure to speak with Mitchell Kaplan from Books and Books, which is one of the leading independent bookshops in the U.S.
We opened our very first bookstore in 1982. Miami and the world was a very different place back in 1982. We're talking, before the internet, before computers really do what they do. In many ways, back in the early 80s, it was the golden age of independent bookselling. There were a lot of people like me who were opening independent bookstores all across the country before Amazon, before the chains, before all of that sort of thing. So it was a very hopeful time, but it was a very difficult time in Miami. Miami was just coming off an extremely difficult year and a difficult decade. There's a wonderful book out called The Year of Dangerous Days, Miami in 1980. 1980 was a very pivotal year in Miami. You had the Mariel boat lift had just happened. You had these horrible race riots, the McDuffie uprising, and then you had the beginning of the cocaine period in Miami. That all was beginning to morph in 1980 and come together. And we opened a bookshop just 2 years after that. So to be a bookseller for over 40 years in Miami and watch the city remake itself has been a unique privilege that I've been able to have.
And it's funny, you're talking about the beginnings, the past, and although Miami is booming, it's a fantastic city, everybody's talking about it, there's still some challenges, right? And I know your bookstore, when coming to banned books, I know there's something going on in Florida as well, and I think you're quite a vocal person when it comes to it as well, right?
Yeah, we're in a very difficult political situation in the state of Florida. What we have is politicians who are trying to weaponize cultural issues, for their own political gain. So we have a governor right now who has decided to weaponize books, and this very horrible campaign to divide people based on, trying to limit the freedom to read, particularly in schools, in public schools, which is an incredible assault on public education here in Florida as well. There's a terrible kind of an attempt to put in curricula and other kinds of things, which almost seems like a war on history, a war on the humanities. It's a very, very virulent time here. And we as booksellers, not only, Books and Books, but, everywhere, we are fighting the fight to try to bring to people's attention the fact that books should never be limited or banned, and that the freedom to read is one of the foundational aspects of who we are as a society.
And that's why bookstores like yours should be celebrated. And I think they will be, right? Because it is Independent Bookseller Day this weekend as well.
Right. It's one of the great things that, that is so democratic about having so many different kinds of bookstores, that you don't have one or two buyers buying for the entire country. You have the variety of books being sold through independent bookstores They're as varied as the people who own them. You know, as we all know, there are so many books published every year that no one bookstore could really carry everything. So really selection becomes an exceedingly democratic effort.
And one thing I have to say about my visit to Books and Books, the one in Coral Gables, it was a bit later on the day, about 9:30. It felt very buzzy, you know. There was a talk with an author. There were people drinking wine at the cafe, people buying magazines, in this case, me. So I loved that. It felt like a hub of people having a drink, you know, enjoying a conversation, and of course, buying books and magazines. There's so many events at Books and Books. I was having a look at the website. Tell us a bit more about that.
Well, the ethos behind Books and Books and the foundational spirit behind the bookstore is the notion of the third place. You know, the notion of after work, after home, where do you go? You go to a local neighborhood bookstore. And that's what we've been for 40 some odd years. And we've tried to be that hub that services our community. So to that end, in our main store in Coral Gables, we have a cafe with a beer and wine license. We have music on the weekends and on Wednesday evenings. And then we have a full series of events. We have over 400 events per year. So you happen to wander into one of those. Sometimes we have 2 events going at the same time. If you go to booksandbooks.com, you can find out what's going on with all our different events. Over the past, the past week or 2, we've had everyone from Amor Tolls to Michael Andaje.
But Michu, just picking up, you know, you're talking about how many events there are in Books and Books, which I find it fascinating. And you've also expanded the brand, especially in Florida. You have other shops. I did came across to the one in the airport. Very useful. Yeah. Very, very useful.
But what went on is that in 1982, we opened the first bookstore in a part of Miami called Coral Gables. We now have 4 bookstores in South Florida. And then we have a 5th in the airport. And then we have a 6th with a relationship with Judy Blume in Key West. So that's another store that is associated with us. So we have kind of like 6 different Books and Books locations throughout South Florida. And the main one is in Coral Gables and Key West. Judy and George, who run that store, do a marvelous job. And so that's where we are after 40 some odd years. And it's almost impossible to believe. I mean, I was kind of in my mid-20s when we started, and it's been a blink. 40 years later, here we are. It's a really wonderful period right now, because what I'm discovering is a lot of younger people are rediscovering the power of bookstores, and that's happening all across the country. But, you know, with our cafe, people come, hang out, do their work, browse books, have a coffee, have a wine. So we really are, you know, fulfilling what our mission has always been, which is to be that community hub and to be that place where, you know, people just want to hang out and meet people. We're in such a very, very difficult period where we're so fractured. And the idea of community is so attractive right now. And meeting your neighbors and being able to talk and discuss things. It's the highest role that we can play as a bookstore.
And Michu, I have to say thank you as well for having a great selection of magazines. I think I love when a bookstore actually also sell magazines. I think it's very important because, let's be honest, there are few places these days where you can actually go and buy magazines.
It's true. And what I love is we put in the Coral Gables store, we have the magazine selection kind of outside in our breezeway, which I love. I love that whole idea of a newsstand. You know, I was brought up going to visit the newsstand every weekend to see what new magazines there were. I'm a real believer in printed media and the considered browsing that a magazine gives you, to be able to spend time off your computer and look through something analog and physical. Those are all things that I think I never want to see us lose at all.
And you are a busy man. You're not only the founder of Books and Books, but you're also a film producer, right?
Yeah, I started a film production company a number of years ago because I love to bring stories to people. So we did a film called The Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, starring Lily James and Mikkel Huisman, which we filmed in England, and it's based on the best-selling book of the same name. And then we did another one that we filmed in Dublin called The Man Who Invented Christmas, which is about Charles Dickens and the writing of A Christmas Carol. And then along with my partner, Paula Mazer, we also did another one called Let Him Go, based on a novel. So everything we do is books into film or television.
And from food neighborhoods this week, Monocle's George Ruskin heads to Peckham for a full day of eating in the vibrant South London community.
Mange two.
The protagonist of the acclaimed British sitcom Only Fools and Horses, Del Boy Trotter, was famous for his catchphrase, mange two. Although Peckham's prodigal son is no longer on our screens, his catchphrase has never been more appropriate. Peckham truly is the place to eat it all. Where would Del Boy go for breakfast? My money is on Roma Cafe for a slap-up full English. This legendary greasy spoon is famed for its portion sizes, with mountains of bacon, omelettes and baked beans flying out of the kitchen all morning. For a sweeter start to the day, join the queue outside Toad Bakery, one of this neighbourhood's instant cult classics. Their bagel croissant sells out fast, so get there early to avoid disappointment. Sitting atop Peckham's brunch ecosystem is Coal Rooms, an atmospheric dining room tucked away in the Victorian station. The smell and sound of the age of steam are evoked by the restaurant's coal-fire grill and the urgent hiss of its espresso machine. And their bacon sandwich, yes, bacon sandwich, is fit for the Orient Express. You'll need a long walk after all that breakfast. This is best done with a wander into the boutiques of the Bussey building. For a mid-morning pick-me-up, head to Old Spike, where they provide a smooth dark roast espresso for you and job opportunities for the homeless community. South London Louis is another spot that serves up excellent coffee with a side order of social justice. Based in the South London Art Gallery, it was devised by Redemption Roasters, the world's first prison-based coffee roastery. The supper clubs here are a local top secret, so please don't tell anyone you heard about them here. If you're here at the weekend, sharpen your elbows and make a beeline for Peckham's Salvage Yard, the flea market come treasure trove at Copeland Park. A word of advice though, make sure you've thought about transportation before sealing the deal on that chaise longue or wardrobe or whatever can make your lunch reservation at Artusi difficult. Space is at an absolute premium at this neighbourhood Italian joint, credited as the crucible for London's pasta renaissance. The lightning-fast lunch service means you'll have a linguine alla vongole under your nose before you can say Trebbiano. Long lazy lunches are best spent at Levan, where you can expect the perfect soundtrack playing over the speakers at this lively local spot, named after legendary DJ Larry Levan. The menu here is a sharing plates affair with natural wines flowing all afternoon. For a feast on your feet, fill your belly with fiery jerk chicken at the barbecue on the corner of Bournemouth Road. It's totally unofficial, but they're usually always happy to share what they've got on the grill. Afternoons are for exploring Peckham's parks. Wander up to Peckham Rye, choose your spot on the vast expanse of grass, and sunbathe to the sound of picnics and football kickabouts. For a picnic, I prefer Telegraph Hill, which has some of London's best views, and the more low-key Burgess Park has a serene lake and a well-used community barbecue area. Get there early on sunny afternoons to bag a spot. If the weather isn't set fair, Peckhamplex offers ludicrously cheap movie screenings and butter popcorn in old-school surroundings. Or Four Quarters is the retro arcade for a game of Street Fighter over a burger and a pint of craft pale ale. If you're in Peckham over the summer, everyone will ask you the same thing. What time should we meet at Frank's Cafe? Legendary is an overused word in these parts, but this rooftop spot is deserving of its title. It emerges from winter hibernation every year with bolder flavours than the last. This year's offering features Scotch bonnet chicken wings and Vada Pav, paired with the house cocktails, an Aperol sour, or a mango picante. Dinner choices in Peckham are numerous and varied. Michelin sings the praises of Naif's staggeringly ambitious vegan cuisine, and rightly so. And Peckham's cellars will have you feeling like you're at a friend's house for dinner. If your friend's house is in the Michelin Guide, that is. For a cosy evening, it's Il Giardino every time. This backstreet Sardinian trattoria has been around for years, but it was catapulted to fame by the recent local rom-com Rye Lane. The main characters Dom and Yas come here for their first date, and it's now well on the way to being the Notting Hill bookshop of the South. Peckham's energy ramps up in the evening. For a quieter pint, walk up to Skeighan's, South London's most idyllic Irish watering hole. You'll get a warm welcome from the friendly crowd and the smoothest pint of Guinness this side of the Irish Sea. If lager and Jamaican light bites are more your thing, then the Prince of Peckham is the pub for you. No night in Peckham can end before a stop at Jumbie, the hi-fi rum bar that has become the talk of the town. Get down with a cup of their lethally delicious rum punch, a bowl of plantain nachos, and settle into a soundtrack of reggae and dancehall. Mange 2 in Peckham, complete.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
We're back here with the Curator, a weekly highlight show here on Monocle Radio. This time from Monocle Design, Grace Charlton meets one of the founders of French company Invisible Collection, which began as an online marketplace with the mission of making contemporary interior design more easily available to the public.
The reason why we built Invisible Collection was because of the realization that most of the beautiful houses that we were seeing all over design magazines like, AD or other publications were actually pieces that had been designed by an interior designer for the house that they were designing, so for a specific client. And these pieces were not accessible to the rest of the world because they had been designed for this unique client, made with an incredible artisan, but there was no channel of distribution for these pieces.
And you mentioned artisans, but for me, you're a lot about craft. I was wondering if you could talk about how you go about selecting the designers that you choose to champion.
We do a lot of research. My business partner, Isabel, specifically spends most of her time selecting these designers, meeting with designers, and just discovering new emerging talents. The way that we select designers is very organic. We typically only work with designers who we feel inspirations that we understand, have their unique aesthetic, work with craftsmen that can accommodate for bespoke and custom requests, typically working with people whose work we think will pass the test of time. Those who hopefully will become, the Jean-Michel Franck or the Jean Royer of tomorrow.
You are a recipient of a Monocle Design Award. When we spoke before that, you mentioned how the craft aspect helped turn around these companies who didn't know when their next paycheck would be coming from. You've been able to give these companies a way to extend the production beyond just a bespoke project.
The designers and the ateliers were really spending so much time and so much creativity and really all of their talent into designing one upholstery piece or maybe just curtains for a project, and they would be working for several weeks or months on this one piece. But as you mentioned, it wasn't really done at scale at all, which we thought was quite sad because it meant that they couldn't necessarily invest in the development of their ateliers, continue hiring, and it was very difficult for them to train new people who would make sure that their craft is preserved over time. It's really important that we give them that level of orders every quarter or every year so that they could really grow their business. We work with over 300 ateliers, and all of them make to measure make by hand. There's no mass production, and that really is the essence of our business model.
And like you said, you're very international, but there is maybe more of a heritage and appreciation for that in France, would you say? Is that fair? You've got Mobilier National that you work with, as well as like Le 19 a lot of workshops to be able to tap into.
We're incredibly lucky. And when we created Invisible Collection, we thought that we would have the top 20 or top 100 designers from each country. And it is true that there's so much talent out there everywhere. But in France, we're really, really lucky to have a whole industry that is built around craftsmanship. Of course, also because of the luxury fashion industry. And actually, when you look at it, you realize that most of the ateliers that we work with in design are also the same ateliers that haute couture brands and luxury brands work with. So there's a huge crossover there, and it's a great honor for us to be working with the ateliers of the 19 that you mentioned from Chanel, and it's so wonderful that the design community can benefit from these incredible expertise and these incredible know-hows that have been developed for haute couture specifically and can now be applied to interiors.
You started as an online business and now you have outposts in Paris, New York and London, and Marylebone actually, not too far from here. I also saw this morning in my inbox that you're hosting a Thierry Lemaire showcase in New York. How is it for you to have these like physical outposts?
The reason why we created Invisible Collection online, I think there were two reasons. One, as founders, we're very international and there was no way that we were going to create a gallery that wasn't offering the furniture to an international clientele. We wanted to be able to offer our furniture to everyone immediately without being restricted by borders, and the only way to do that was online. We just recognized that there was so much talent and so many designers that were creating and manufacturing these pieces without having a channel of distribution that we knew there was no way that we would be able to produce and hold as much stock as we would need in a physical space. So the online world was a no-brainer for us. That being said, Isabel and I come from the luxury fashion world and we're obsessed with clienteling and client experience and building personal relationships with our clients. And so we actually immediately had pop-ups, created physical experiences. In 2023, we organized 100 events all over the world over the past 7 years, from Aspen to the Hamptons to Dubai to Milan. But we also felt that it would make a lot of sense for us to have permanent homes. And that's why we opened 5 showrooms. So we have 2 in New York, which offer really different experiences. One is in a beautiful Upper East Side townhouse, and it's just, I hope, a very, very lovely place to go for coffee and to experience the way of life. The second one is a penthouse, which is the highest residence outside of Asia and is just like the coolest place ever. Every time we create a space, we really want to imagine it like a home where people feel welcome and where people can really experience the furniture.
And we're still going on here on the Curator. I'm Fernando Augusto Pacheco. A new initiative is hoping to transform the land below Miami's elevated metro rail. Spanning 10 miles, the Underline will see the creation of a linear park and an urban trail and will become a destination for public art and hospitality. Monocle's Carlota Rebelo speaks with the Underline's founder, Meg Daly.
The Underline project is really a citizen-led movement to transform the way that we live in our city. We're one of those young cities that we don't walk and bike very much, really because infrastructure is not designed for that. And the Underline is taking over 10 miles, 120 acres of land below our elevated rail and turning it into a park and urban trails and a public art destination and a community activation space. And it was all really sort of started by a big idea I had. 10 years ago, I had a bike accident and broke both of my arms. And because I was not driving, because I couldn't, I was walking below Metrorail to get to the doctor. And I thought, wow, why don't we turn all this dead land into a beautiful park and trail? So a lot of people helped. We have hundreds and hundreds of volunteers, and we partner with the Department of Transportation and Public Works at the county to bring this really beautiful, transformative project to the community.
Now, one of the interesting things about the project as well is how, of course, it's happening in phases, as all the projects do, but you are opening each of these phases to the public as it's ready. So phase 2 is the most recent one, if I'm not mistaken. Tell me about the 2 phases that are now open and that people are able to enjoy.
I think one of the hallmarks of this project is that we listen first and then we design. And we have a great team to work with, field operations out of New York. And so there was a lot of listening before we ever put pencil to paper. And phase 1 is in a very urban, very dense area. It's part of our downtown, connects to one of the more active and remote transit hubs in the county. And we have everything from basketball to soccer, 30,000 native plants and trees. Everything is dog friendly. And we have 6 art installations, and we program that with over 200 free events a year for the community. They were all their ideas, the community's ideas. They weren't mine. And then phase 2 goes through more single family residential areas. So we have less amenities. We have our first playground. We have a meditation area at the transit station. So if you're getting stressed out waiting for the train, you can meditate in guided meditation. And we have our first bioswale, which is green infrastructure to mitigate stormwater. So in this area, we really focus on everything is native planting. So the birds, the bees, and the butterflies are very happy that phase 2 opened recently with a big block party and a formal ribbon cutting.
One of the interesting things is almost these microforests that can be found dotted around the underline. Just how important has that green element been to make this a greener project and to have resilience and sustainability in mind, which, as we know, is paramount to all new developments happening in cities?
Absolutely. If we can plan our cities, not just for green offset, but driven by green infrastructure, we really have an opportunity to solve problems, not just mobility and safety, which this does, but how can we contribute to reducing the heat island effect from adding tree canopy? And in phase 3, which is a 7-mile implementation, phase 1 is half a mile, phase 2 is 2 miles, and the remaining 7 miles are under construction now. We're using a microforest technique designed by a Japanese designer named Miyake. And the Miyake method is basically think of the size of a basketball court and overplant it with all these native trees and plants, and they all compete for sunlight. So it grows 10 times faster, 20 times more dense, and 30 times more biodiverse. And we'll have 24 of them in our future phase 3. So when we're done with this project, we'll have 500,000 native plants and trees in 120 acres.
Now, you mentioned there at the beginning also the mobility aspect of this. How big has that side of it been in all this planning and all these meetings? How high up in the agenda has the mobility and getting people from A to B been part of that discussion?
There's the theory, if you build it, they will come. And that's what we're finding. There's huge pent-up demand for people to have the freedom to bike and walk safely again. Only a very small percentage of the population feels safe in Miami-Dade County. It's one of the most dangerous places to walk and bike in the country. So adding these safe off-road facilities connected to transit really feeds into first and last mile connectivity into these neighborhoods. We connect to 24 schools. So the big idea is to get our kids back on bike and being able to walk or bike to school again, like I did. I'm 63, and we skipped a generation, my children, who weren't allowed to get on a bike and go to school. And so that is the key driver, is safe multimodal transportation. And what's interesting is really the bulk of the funding for the project, the total construction cost is $140 million, have come from transportation dollars. And then the park components are layered into that. That's the green and the recreational pieces. And then you have the art and the programs. So this is a plus of doing a lot with one facility that was intended for one use when it was designed.
You are with The Curator, our weekly highlight show here on Monocle Radio. United through savoir-faire, watchmakers display the very best of their craft at Watches and Wonders, the annual trade fair that gathers the world's major watchmaking houses in Geneva. We met René Bernard, head of research and development for watchmaking at French luxury powerhouse Van Cleef & Arpels, to find out more about the craft and sense of wonderment behind the collection.
We do watches since the beginning of the company. We are a jeweler, high jeweler, and a watchmaker at the same time. I would say today the watches we do are pieces of jewelry which tell time. It's a watch, but it's also a piece of jewelry or high jewelry which tells time. So the jewelry aspect is enormously important for us. We combine 4 things into the watch. First of all is the design and the story. So we want to enchant with the story, with a garden that indicates time just by flowers. We create wind in a garden, Then we have the design. The design is like, how do we interpret that story? The third is the métier d'art, the craftsmanship, because we love craftsmanship. We have rare craftsmanship on the dials. We have different craftsmanship. We are specialized in certain craftsmanship. We don't do everything. We stick to what we can do, and we keep on inventing new aspects. And the fourth is high watchmaking. And the result of what we do, that's why it takes us 4 years to develop a piece like a brise d'été, because we have to mix and match all these 4 aspects. They influence each other. So that's why it takes us ages to develop a new piece. You have to talk about all these elements, and all 4 elements have to be satisfied to become Van Cleef & Arpels watch or Van Cleef & Arpels jewelry piece which tells time.
And I think it's so fascinating, some of these worlds that you draw inspiration from, whether it's fairies, ballerinas, the concept of luck. Sometimes it's more associated with childhood stories and then childlike fantasies that we forget when we grow up, right? Is it important for pieces that are so precious, like a piece of jewelry that tells time, to bring back that element of fantasy for the wearer?
Well, definitely. I think memories of childhood and things that are interesting for kids should be interesting for adults. We lose sometimes the interest for beautiful things. Our kids can be easily amazed about a flower. Look at this flower. Isn't that awesome? We preserve this and we try to bring it back. Not thinking about in what kids are interested, but we think that these are universal themes like love stories, enchanted nature, butterflies, shooting stars. This is also talks to also adults, which kept a little Peter Pan soul in them. Actually, we talk about poetry of time, words said or written, which actually, when you read them or hear them, should touch your soul, should touch your feelings, trigger off emotion. And that's what we try to integrate into the pieces, so that we have stories which are nice, which are dream type of stories. And we use these elements by animating them also to trigger off emotion, not through words, but through our creations. So that's where the poetry of time comes in, and the fields where we draw our ideas are immense and powerful source of new ideas.
Something else that brings that sense of awe is looking at all the different layers each watch incorporates, which hours of work and a lot of collaboration between different experts and different artisans in your ateliers. Can you speak a little bit more about that and how you work together to bring such complex movements to life?
The interface between the creative studio doing the drawings, the craftsmanship and the technique is definitely one of the most challenging and one of the most interesting interfaces. I'll give you an example. If you look at the brise d'été, the idea was to create a brise d'été, a summer breeze, a slight wind in a summer garden. And when we saw the first drawings, she was drawing flowers with a very fine stem, but quite big head of the flower itself. And she said, I see that in enameling, painted, really using craftsmanship we master. Maybe a sapphire or a savorid stone in the center. we looked at this and I said, well, if you have a really fine stem and you have a heavy weight on top, it was really difficult to move the flower because tiny little stem and you have a big weight. And the weight is given by the use of gold because we enamel only on gold. And then you add the enamel painting, you add the little element which is in rose gold holding the saffronite stone. So you have a head which is big and heavy aesthetically, and from the craftsmanship side, we really wanted to have this flower like this and with a really fine stem and not a stem like this. How did we do that? So we had to come up with a system actually that enables us to move the flower having a small stem. So the impact on the technique is direct because what we wanted to do was given through creativity team and through craft. The technical reaction had to be something which holds the flower. So what we do is we hold the flower from underneath. So the flower head is here and the movement is actually holding the flower head and the stem is attached to the flower head, and the stem is moved by the flower head and not the flower head by the stem. So we had to inverse our thinking about how to move around the flower in order to realize what we wanted to do. This is the most challenging and the most beautiful interface because it makes us come up with complete new ideas, complete new architectures about the movements, how to do something. And this is the fun part. We love that.
And we end the Curator on an excellent note, talking about the very first Ethiopian Pavilion, which is arriving in Venice and did not disappoint. Curated by British writer Len Sisay, the striking paintings by artist Tesfaye Ergesa made a memorable debut. Both large-scale figurative paintings and smaller portraits capture Ethiopian iconography and German influences, where Ergesa spent a number of years studying. At a buzzing opening, which included a traditional Ethiopian coffee ceremony, it was clear that the show had caught the attention of the art crowd and the eye of many a collector. Robert Bound took both artist and curator aside to find out more about the underlying themes of the exhibition. Here is Len on the central idea for the show.
Well, the central idea for the show links to the theme of the Biennale, which is foreigners everywhere, as defined by the curator of the Biennale. And so the title of this exhibition is Prejudice and Belonging. I mean, I must talk about my relationship to Tesfaye and how...
Please do, yeah.
Is that okay? Because that to me feeds into what this whole exhibition is about as well. It's not simply a drawing by numbers, there's something much deeper going on. And Tesfaye some time ago, and Tesfaye will be able to speak to this, from Ethiopia, decided that he wanted to curate his exhibition. So the vision that I'm within that has made this happen is centrally inside the artist, which is a joy. So we then embarked on building a relationship through Tesfaye's work, through him making the work in the studio. I'm sorry to talk about you while you're sat here, and feeling each other out, really. Was I up to the job? Was I, able to connect with Tesfaye and connect with Tesfaye's work? My job is to serve as curator, to serve the artist and serve the artist's vision, whichever way that manifests. So that could be a conversation, that could be a conversation about the work. Actually, Tesfaye's his attention to his work is his business. That's not for me to intrude on or to influence or to whatever. But the wider context, that's what we can discuss. We did discuss.
It's beautifully put. And I wondered, Tesfaye, in that instance, what it's like. You're not working to a brief, but working in collaboration. Sometimes there's strength in numbers. Sometimes it can put an artist into a box. How was it working in the studio and coming up with this fresh body of work under the beady eye of Lem Sisay?
Well, actually, this is something I was thinking about for a long time. I told you, Lem, I've been looking for to meet Lem since, 3 years or something like that. Since I know you, basically. Because now we are connected. Lemon, he was born and raised in London, but basically his parents are from Ethiopia. I'm from Ethiopia, and he's really a good craftsman in terms of words. And I'm an artist, and I do a lot of things with image. So the collaboration between image and words, in my imagination, looked amazing. I tried to contact him, and he was willing, to join. And since then, we have, this is an incredible journey for us together. And now we are here.
And this, the work that you and then Lem have been talking about, it looks so bold and so beautiful on the walls of the Palazzo here. When we walk in, there's a short video of you working, and it's plain to see your sort of joy and confidence with paint. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about your relationship with the brush and with paint going back.
Well, actually, painting is an incredible medium, Basically, you can do almost everything with it. Even if it's just, a visual element, but you can still add, lots of abstract imagery into it so that, to give it a sense of, reality. One of the things that fascinates me about painting, though, is that I am able to learn about myself a lot. And this is an incredible journey. It's not about, things that I know only, even though that's always part of the painting, but it's just like a medium to go beyond what you know and into a greater dimension. And actually, then you have to trust the process and you have to go bold, because as long as the painting in the studio, it's a conversation between the painting and me, and it can go on and go on until we both kind of need a break or go to different painting. This is very, very interesting. If you want me to go into a little bit of detail, the process goes on. I have always a kind of fragile image in my head, and then I use the surface of canvas, to take that from me onto it, and then the canvas at some point become full, and then I take some down and it become empty again, and then I fill it up with motif, image, figures, and then actually it's it goes up and then down and up and down, and at the end I kind of keep only the things that I cannot remove, and that becomes a painting.
And you work, the show here is full of really large images. I mean, you presumably are you're on a ladder for doing the top half of these pictures. And then their buddies are these small portraits. And there's a wonderful sort of juxtaposition of scales, not necessarily of subject matter or of style. Is that a bit of they're obviously telling a different story. Maybe you'd like to tell us what the story is of the relationship between the scale, and whether or not they're a bit of a palette cleanser after working on such a big canvas.
Yeah. Well, it's completely different, but at the same time, they have also shared so much. You can see it as if you are making a movie, you have this wide angle where you see all the elements, and then you focus on the face at some point. And in terms of working, in terms of process, a big painting takes really long time. So you kind of build up a relationship, very intimate relationship, because it stays with you for a long time. But at the same time, you need smaller work so that, you can work, you can, finish everything and then see what the result, whether you like it or not. So it takes a couple of days, and the other one a couple of weeks. So it gives you that kind of balance, to see something, whatever result that comes.
And that's all we've got time for this week's edition of The Curator. The show was produced by David Stevens and presented by me, Fernando Augusto Pacheco. Join us again next week, and thank you for listening.